Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's educational forum here in Springfield. Thank you all for taking time to join us for what is an incredibly important conversation about the future of public education in our state. My name is Senator Joe Major, and I will be your moderator for this evening. Tonight's discussion will focus on the current status of H 955 and Act 73, two major educational formation initiatives that are shaping conversations in Montpelier and in communities across Vermont. These proposals address issues including educational funding, governance, district structure, educational equity, local control, and the long-term sustainability of our public school system. We know that education is deeply personal to Vermonters. Our schools are not only the places of learning, but also the heart of many of our communities. This decision being discussed tonight will have significant impact on students, families, educators, taxpayers, and local communities for years to come. We are fortunate tonight to be joined by an outstanding panel that brings together perspectives from both state and local leadership. Our panel includes members of the Vermont Senate, members of the Vermont House of Representatives, the Secretary of Education, and local school superintendents who are working directly with students, teachers, and families every single day. The purpose of tonight's forum is not only to share information, but also to encourage respectful dialogue, thoughtful questions, and community engagement. We hope this evening helps provide clarity on where the legislation currently stands and what changes may still occur. Vermonters can continue to participate in the process moving forward. We also want to thank Springfield High School for hosting tonight's event and SAPA TV for televising and recording the forum so the community members throughout the region can stay informed and engaged. At this time, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Tonight, we are honored to be joined by a distinguished panel of leaders from the state government and local education who bring a wide range of experience and perspectives to this important discussion. First, we welcome Zoe Saunders, Vermont's Secretary of Education, who has been closely involved in the ongoing conversation surrounding educational transformation, statewide policy implementation, and the future direction of Vermont's public education system. We are also pleased to welcome Rebecca Holcomb, who previously served as Vermont's Secretary of Education and now serves in the Vermont House of Representatives. Representative Holcomb brings both statewide leadership experience and deep policy experience to tonight's conversation. Joining us as well is Alice Edmonds, who proudly represents Springfield in the Vermont House and has been an advocate for local communities, students, and families throughout this legislative process. Representing Windsor County in the Vermont Senate is Becca White, whom has been actively engaged in discussions surrounding education funding, governance, and the future of Vermont schools. We are also honored to have with us Ruth Hardy, a member of the Senate Finance Committee who has played an instrumental role in helping formulate and evaluate workable education funding and transformational proposals during this session. And finally, we welcome two local educational leaders who understand firsthand the challenges and opportunities facing our schools and students. Peter Burrows, Superintendent of Springfield Schools, and Andrew Haas, who both bring valuable on-the-ground perspectives from our regional school systems. Please join me in welcoming all of our panelists. So a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to start the first question. We have two microphones here. So as you want to come and ask questions, and I want this to be driven by you, the people in the audience, because this will affect you, your children, your property taxes. So I implore you to come and ask questions. But I'll ask the first question. And this question will initially be for Secretary Saunders. For those in the audience who may not be familiar with H955 and Act 73, can you explain the overall goals of the educational transformation effort and why lawmakers believe change is necessary now?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. And to begin, I just want to thank all of you for being here this evening. It's so important that we engage in these opportunities for dialogue. And I'll take. How about this?
Perfect.
Okay. I'll begin again. Hi, good evening. I'm Zoe Saunders. I'm the Secretary of Education and want to begin by thanking you for being part of this conversation and also thank my panelists who have joined me this evening. It's so important that we continue to engage in robust conversations around the future of public education in the state of Vermont. I'll begin by setting the stage and sharing some context around Act 73, along with the ongoing discussions in the legislature related to H955. Act 73 was a bipartisan effort to improve our overall education system in Vermont. It is designed to move us to a place where our funding system can be more equitable and we can provide greater opportunities for all students across the state of Vermont. Currently, our system is unfair in many respects. We have great disparity in terms of per pupil spending, and that results in our more affluent communities spending twice as much than other communities in the state that tend to serve students in economically disadvantaged communities. That also translates into teacher salaries having great disparity. So while we are one of the top spenders in education in the country, on average, our teachers make below the national average. And when you compare teacher salaries across communities, there's wide disparity, sometimes as large as $30,000 for teachers with the same experience just because of where they live. We also have great variability in terms of our graduation requirements and ultimately the expectations that we're setting for all students. Currently, graduation standards are locally derived, and Act 73 is moving in a direction where we can set really clear statewide expectations, and that's important because we want to signal to all students that we believe that they can all excel at high levels. And so as we look at our overall system, Act 73 recognized the need for comprehensive education transformation and that we needed to look at 3 policy levers altogether. And that first focused on education quality. All of this work started by setting very clear goals for what we wanted our students to be able to access in terms of educational opportunities. And then we looked at how to fund the system and moving towards a foundation formula, which many other states use and is considered to be more equitable than our current funding. That comes with a base funding amount for each student and then weights depending on the specific needs for that student. So if the student has an IEP or the student comes from an economically disadvantaged community, there are additional weights to support with the delivery of that child's education, so that no matter where a child lives, no matter the size or the wealth of their community, every Vermont student has access to a world-class education. And in order to do that, and for the funding to work, we also need to achieve scale. Scale allows us to pool our resources in ways that provides an array of programming for students, and that's why part of Act 73 also looks at larger districts. So it's 3 parts of the puzzle for Act 73. First, starting with raising quality expectations, and that's in the form of statewide graduation requirements, then moving to a foundation formula, and also to larger districts to ensure that we can operate at scale. There has been much progress that has been made on many fronts of Act 73, but what is remaining is related to how we will configure new and larger districts, and the process for enacting those larger districts. That is where H955 comes into play. H955 proposed a path for voluntary mergers and also adding another layer, which is called a Comprehensive Education Service Agency, to help facilitate with the merger process. So while many on this panel may have different positions, we've advocated against that approach in terms of the administration and the agency because we really feel that moving towards larger districts is important in order for the funding to work. And the process that's outlined in H955 requires a lot of steps, kind of a 10-step plus process, and it's unlikely to result in larger districts. And we'll need to be able to move in that direction in order to shift our funding formula for it to be more equitable. So the debate underway at this point, and is actively engaged in committee, is the process by which the state will move towards this broader vision. I think it's important to note and to reinforce that all of us on the panel share a lot of the same common goals in terms of what we want to see for the future of public education and centering all of that around what's in the best interest of students. Where the conversation is now is really around how we will get there. And H955 is proposing an alternate approach. The Senate is also looking at other vehicles in which to move forward, and we look forward to engaging in further conversation. I don't want to take the whole hour and a half explaining, so I will stop there and be happy to interject and expand as the discussion unfolds.
Thank you. Senator Hardy, what's the current status of H955 in the legislative process, and what major decisions are still unresolved?
Okay, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Senator Ruth Hardy. I'm visiting you from Middlebury. I'm one of the senators in the Addison district, and I serve on the Senate Finance Committee, and I just want to be clear that H955 is not my bill. I didn't introduce it. It came to us from the House, and it's really the next step in implementing Act 73. And many of us on the stage actually did not vote for Act 73. So, but right now we are in the process of implementing it and trying to make sure that it is implemented in a way that is not too disruptive to our public education system. And I think that's largely the goal of H955, and also that it includes local voices and local decision making. So it includes your voices and your decisions about how you want your local schools to be configured. And as the Secretary mentioned, there's some evidence, but not complete evidence, that larger districts are more economically viable. But there's certainly more evidence that larger districts tend to offer more educational opportunities for students. So H955 builds on the recommendations of a task force that met off session, which Representative Holcomb served on, and she can talk more about it, but a task force that recommended voluntary targeted mergers, regional high school and regional high schools, and overseeing sort of the administrative structure of school districts. These entities called Cooperative Education Service Agencies, or CESAs for short. And I believe there is a CESA here. In fact, so you all are the pioneers and the example that we all have used and the task force looked at to how can you deliver services to students and school districts more economically prudently, more fiscally responsibly through cooperative services throughout a region. So H955 creates CESAs throughout the state, 7 CESAs, and then sets up a voluntary merger process and assigns school districts to CESAs and to groupings for talking about merging. I can look up the details of where you all are, but you stay in the CESA you're in, and then you're going to be in a group of other school districts in the region to talk about whether you want to merge or not. Therefore create a larger school district and maybe be more economically viable, but certainly have more opportunities for students in a lot of the schools. So that's the basis of H955 in the sort of education section. The next part of the bill, like Act 73, deals with moving forward with some of the tax policy changes that were implemented in Act 73. First of all, it creates new tax classifications for property. Right now we have basically two tax classifications. We have homesteads, which are all of our primary residences, our houses, the places where we all live, and non-homesteads. And non-homesteads are kind of everything else. They include apartments and short-term rentals and businesses and farms and everything that is not a primary residence where somebody lives. Act 73 created a third classification, which is basically non-homestead, non-residential, which is a complicated way of saying basically second homes. So it's a way of being able to single out second homes to maybe tax them at a different rate. Hopefully making sure that our primary homestead rates, our residential rates are lower, and perhaps the second homes rate is higher. But really what we're doing in H955 is moving that process forward. There's a lot of work that needs to be done by the tax department and our communities to make that happen. And then we're also creating, in Act 73, there was regional appraisal districts created, and H955 moves that work forward, defining what those districts are and defining how that process will work so that all of the property in the state will be appraised on a schedule and be done in a way that is more consistent and equitable and predictable. Right now, if a town is not able to reappraise or waits to reappraise, people can see a huge spike in their property values, and a lot of communities have seen that over the last few years. And a huge spike in property values means a huge spike in property taxes. So this bill would try to align those regional appraisal districts with the new school districts after communities have done their grassroots process on creating new school districts. There are more details in the bill, but that's basically what's in the bill. It is right now in the Senate Education Committee, and also simultaneously the Senate Finance Committee is working on it. The Education Committee is working on the first part that I described about creating new school districts and CSAs, and the Finance Committee is working on the tax part of it. So I can answer more details on that, but that's the general status, and we hope to vote it out at the Senate committees this week.
Thank you, Senator Hardy. Sir?
Hello, my name is Morgan Wright. I am a small business owner, and I live in Springfield, owned a home here for 5 years. I have children currently in Union Street, Riverside, and the high school. We're a kind of community in pain. And this is going to get around to your act. First, I want to talk about the pay repeal. Our budget was voted no on. I voted no. It was reduced by $367,000 and change. Okay. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, federal grant comes for $575,000. What happens? Does it stay the same budget? No. The budget increases by $207,000. Question. When the feds don't give us a surprise, almost $600,000 next year, who puts the bill then? Budgets don't go down. Springfield is ranked 37 out of 42 high schools in Vermont. Bells Falls is ranked 39. Springfield has a 14-to-1 teacher ratio. Bells Falls has a 10.6 teacher ratio. Vermont is 16th in the country. In 2024, it was 4th. What happened? So in summary, larger budget, more teachers and aides than ever, higher pay and benefits for those said teachers, less students per year, we're not reading a narrative. Lower GPA averages. Rumbling schools and parking lots. Hey, Riverside, nice parking lot. That's great. And on top of that, we have a decrease. So the same thing found is decrease our pupil spending by $181 per student per year. Our pupil spending is $15,000 per student. That's already high. That's where you found the savings? That's where you got it from?
Sir,
really?
I think we get, hold on, I think we get.
So, my final thing
I just want, and I just want to say this, Avery, and I understand your passion. and I appreciate it. But we want to have a respectful dialogue.
Well, I read your voice a little bit, Mike. For anybody. I'm not saying that. I guess the question is, this new act. You said that some people up here do not vote for it. What happens when the act statewide pressures everyone to pay the same, and the students that have more money, spending twice their students, can afford it, and the students that can't. And again, I know small business. I get raises to people who earn it. You guys are putting out a bad product. People are, I own a business. You can really read these applications from these kids that graduate Bell's Hall and Springfield. What's happening? I have kids in these schools.
Just so your question is local control versus state control.
Yeah.
Is that that's fair?
The answer was it's unfair that schools like in Woodstock with a higher income can afford better teams, better this, better that. Correct? What happens when you minimize it? They'll pay a little less, and we'll pay a little more. Can they afford it? Are you putting old people out of their homes so they can't afford their taxes? What are we doing? Your teachers get benefits every year, going up and up and up. What about the rest of us? What about the 401k? You just match that for them, and then that come out of our pocket. Where did it come from? We'd like to know.
I understand. First of all, once again, I understand your passion.
At this table, I know Sean. I worked with Ryan Jerky, great guy. I worked with you, not so great. What do you have to say here?
Now that's it.
Well, hold on.
Can't
I'm taxpayer
let's not
here,
do that.
and you're my senator. Hold on.
I know.
What are you going to say to defend your GPA? What else do you have to say to defend your GPA?
Let me respond to, you had a lot of questions or a lot of statements in there. Let me
I'm
see.
asking your GPA, just your GPA. You're the superintendent, what's happening?
I'm not sure what my GPA.
Well, the high school is 37 out of 42, sir. In the state, Bell's Hall is 39. Help us here, please. These are our children. You're failing us.
Let superintendent answer.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
I think what I'm gathering from your statements
No, it's a question,
and your questions is, what are we doing to increase our student achievement? What is the impact of all of the legislation that's happening on the cost for education in Springfield? I've heard throughout this budget season, and I've just finished year one here, I've heard throughout this budget season people want to see their investments reach an outcome where student test scores go up, where people feel that the dollars they're spending are impactful. We spend a lot of time in this budget process talking about all of the work that we are doing to build those systems to move our outcomes. Vermont as a whole, and I think it's already been discussed by Senator Hardy and Secretary Saunders, is Vermont as a whole is right now struggling with scale. And I was a part of, along with Senator Hardy, Act 46, where the initial movement for mergers started. With more scale, generally comes lower costs. I think one of the things that will come up in conversation tonight about where the current work is on H955, and if you've been following this session, you've seen this work transition significantly from where it started with all the different maps that have come out, etc. I think Springfield, like other communities around us, should be talking about how we can increase scale, especially at the secondary level, to provide more opportunity for students and decrease costs. I think that should be happening, and we have a lot of political headwinds and cultural headwinds that seem to be getting in the way, and they got in the way in this area during Act 46 when the mergers didn't happen here. So I think we have a lot of work to do. I hear you that the costs are significant to the community and that we need to see the money we put in, we need to see the outcomes reflect our investment.
I think a large portion of this deal that some teachers work very hard. I get emails. I got a kid I'm riding a mule. He's trying to fail biology. I ain't gonna let it happen right here in this school. But at the same time, we're watching every teacher probably grab a raise out of $207,000 month increase. Meanwhile, he's putting out a bad product. Kids come out stupider, dumber, and slower. And that's not shit to say, But
I disagree.
I don't,
I disagree.
okay.
You
That's-
disagree with that, with the numbers. You disagree with the numbers they gave. They got 37 out of 42. You disagree with that, sir.
All right,
Well, I will speak to my votes. Good day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Thank you. John Harrison, I'm a member of the Weathersfield School Board, and I'm also a member of the Southeast Windsor Supervisory Union. Weathersfield still is an independent district operating under the umbrella of the SU. My first question is, and I've yet to see it in writing, has an analysis been done as an example when a sample consolidation that shows where the savings are and what they'll be? If it exists, please make it more public because I haven't seen it. I got one other question. I'll wait.
Representative Holcomb. Yeah,
I'm happy to take that, but I'd
Yeah.
actually like to go back.
that's fair.
I want to come to you, but I want to go back to the previous question. Because I think what we're hearing is education is too dang expensive, people can't afford it, people are worried about their kids, and they're worried because it isn't fair. Some kids have better opportunities. And so the question we should be asking is what we're doing addressing that. And I don't know that we are, and that's my concern. Because at the end of the day, it isn't just what you want to do, it's whether you can get it done. And what really frustrates me is we aren't using the data and we aren't using the science. And that's why we're getting bad results at a high price. I'm going to take you back. We did go through Act 46. You know who didn't merge? The tuition towns. But you know what? Merging tuition towns doesn't save any money. But if you look at the small towns, most of them are towns at tuition. And they're buying retail. So if you merge them, they're still buying retail, so there's no cost savings. What we didn't do after Act 46, and if you wind back and if you've worked in schools like Peter has, you know that the state's plan was to focus on improving instruction. And at the agency, they put money together to focus on struggling learners and bringing up those test scores and making sure that the best teacher possible was in front of every kid. And what happened? The secretary at the time, Dan French, fired the person in charge of implementation and took that money and reallocated it to something else. This was about the same time Mississippi began its big effort to improve teaching. Just imagine if Vermont had done that. Imagine if we had enough of an attention span to stay on doing better professional development so every kid had the best teacher they could have. We wouldn't be here now complaining about the loss of scores. We just didn't implement that, and that is the problem. Here's another one. We had a plan in place for a statewide data reporting system that would make sure that we had comparable data, so that if we wanted to figure out who was doing things well at a lower price and being efficient, we would have apples to apples data that we could use to make comparisons across states. Guess what never got implemented? A statewide single data system. So here we are, and we still are struggling to get good data. I want to thank, I don't know if Tim Ash, I think I saw you here, in the, there you are in the back. Tim is in the auditor's office, he's running to be your auditor. I want to thank you, Tim, because when I was trying to figure out where are the opportunities to bring down costs, one of the things that we had to look at was the teacher and staffing data. And our school districts are reducing the number of teachers they have, and they may have more to go, but they are responding. We lost about 7% of our teachers over the last 5 years. They've reduced the number of teachers by about 8%. But where we are gaining employees in schools is in student support staff. So when we go back to why Vermont costs so much more, one of the reasons Vermont costs so much more is we provide about $2,000 more per child on student support services than neighboring states. Our schools are the social safety net for the young people in the state. And guess what? The vacancy rate is in the Department of Mental Health, which the administration is in charge of. 29%. They're missing a third of their employees. Is it any surprise that the cost of mental health is falling back on our school districts? So unless as a state, we can stay focused on what's driving high cost and what's keeping our kids from having the best teachers they need, and how to provide the support services students need in a fair and equitable way that doesn't break taxpayers, we're going to be sitting here and having the same conversation again. And that's what worries me about 955, the bill that's coming across. It's, it's talking about some of the right problems, but it's really assigning a tremendous amount of work to superintendents like Superintendent Burrows and others in the area and across the state who are working really hard, thinly staffed to support this work, and they're doing it on very tight timelines. If you have to do everything all at the same time, if you have to stop all the work you've been doing on statewide proficiency-based graduation requirements and start working on new graduation requirements because we changed the law in '73, you're going to have to just start all over again where you started all over again 5 years ago. That's the problem. We need to stay focused on what matters, and we need to do it long enough to get the job done. Because at the end of the day, an elaborate strategic plan with 500 pages of what we should do doesn't do it. It's the work that's done on the ground to make it actually happen with kids. So I really do have to speak to that. The question you asked is there a model of where it's done well? Well, if we had better ability to compare data, we would have a better model, wouldn't we? But we don't. But what we do know is that our schools are struggling with some shared problems. And we also know that every problem can be solved multiple ways. I 100% agree with the Secretary that our system is inequitable, and there are districts that actually are not putting enough into their kids. We could fix that tomorrow. We just don't care enough to do it. We could lift the floor in the current spending formula and make sure they spent enough. In terms of what they're struggling with, one of the biggest challenges we have right now is that the changes in practice that were supposed to go with the changes in our special education funding formula were never supported or implemented by the state. So what happened is we made it easier to identify students with disabilities, but we didn't put in the support for practice around inclusive practices that keep them from needing to be identified in the first place. And we now send twice as many students as the national average to separate schools, often for-profit private schools, to serve our most complicated and challenging kids instead of keeping them at home. And what we know is that when that happens, when you outsource that problem and you start thinking of special education as a place and not as services to help children succeed, we know we lose track of them, and we also lose track of cost. So it's hard, because it's hard to know whether the problem we have is the model, or if the problem is failure to implement, or if the problem is the challenge of scale in some places, which is truly real. When we talked at the redistricting task force, we said people are struggling to pay their bills. They need us to take that seriously. And they need to know that when they send their kids to school, they are getting the best education we can give them. So we asked, what's the fastest way to get that done? And I need to correct a misunderstanding about shared services. First of all, something like 44 other states have education service agencies. We're one of the few that doesn't, and we're the only very small rural state that doesn't. And the reason other people do it is shared services are a way to quickly get scale without going through complex mergers with people who don't want to merge with you. And they let you quickly get some of the supports that you need. So that's where it is. And in answer to your question, there are examples of districts that do well, that are smaller. Sometimes they have more resources, but there's no comp. There are examples of places it's been successful. There have been examples of places where it's not, and part of it is the inconsistency and the lack of coherent vision.
Mr. Moderator, may I interrupt? I suggest if you put another one of these on, you have a timer for the questioners and a timer for the respondent. That was a yes or no question.
No, but I did ask if I could respond to the...
Fair enough. Go ahead.
Second question?
Yeah, I do have an answer to the question around the modeling, if you'd like me to respond.
Sure.
So at every iteration of the legislation, we have produced modeling to identify how this will be structured. So we have made those budgets available. We have shown what's possible with the funding levels that are proposed and what can be done at scale. So we've actually, we've modeled that. We've shown the budget. We've identified the choices that are available depending on what scale we operate. And so when we put forward the initial proposal, it was based on data and research around what size you needed to operate at a minimum of 3,900 students in order to deliver on the educational goals that we put forward. And that does mean that we have to shift the way we deliver education. So we did show that through very clear budgets around how we would resource the system. And we all know that budgets are an expression of priorities, and within those budgets, we're able to show that you can increase teacher salaries, expand access to pre-K, expand access to career and technical education, provide the wraparound support that is needed for students, and we did model that. Now, over time, the legislation shifted and some of those inputs changed in terms of reducing the number of enrollment or shifting the goals. And at every point, the Agency of Education has put forward modeling and budgets to that effect. And in the most recent conversations that we're talking about, could we go lower in terms of the number of students? We identified that yes, you can achieve a certain level of scale if you have, let's say, 2,000 students. But below 2,000 students, you have to have, there are significant trade-offs. And specifically what we were able to show in our budgets and modeling, that you lose the ability to increase teacher salary, or you lose the ability to offer certain programs. So it ends up coming down to a very clear choice when we look at our education system, and that's whether or not we're going to actually increase spending or reduce opportunities. And if you think about raising the floor, as Representative Holcomb had mentioned, that would just increase the cost of the system. And so we already know that we're at a point where it's untenable for many voters to pay. So we have made those available. I'm happy to follow up and make sure that we can share that. And those budgets are about choices, and we've worked with business managers across the state. We've worked with principals and superintendents to look at those and evaluate what kind of choices can be made. But I think the main point here is that what we're talking about in terms of investment is the single largest investment in education of any other state in the country. This is a generous funding amount, but we have to make sure that we're operating at scale so those resources are actually getting to the students.
And I'm going to step. Senator Hart, did you want to respond to that? 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, I want to make sure that you get your actual question asked, but I with all due respect, I disagree with this secretary. Their modeling that they did, that she just described, was largely discredited and not respected by the legislature, that they were done on constructed school districts that were not real and not put into place in practice in Vermont, and most superintendents who looked at those models said that they were not accurate, and they were largely discredited, and we did not use them in our analysis because of that.
So I do want to say one thing. This is obviously a very passionate and debatable topic. And I do appreciate all the panelists, and I do appreciate everyone here. We have to get to some solution. And so, once again, I appreciate the passion, and I appreciate the debate as well. Yeah.
Second question, the block grant. It's a little bit difficult. None of us have the perfect crystal ball to know what this is going to look like in 2 years, 6 years, or 8 years, exactly how our districts and these new districts are going to look like. But our CFO went through a process of attempting to come up with the numbers effect that the block grant system would have on both our SU, and I can tell you that Wethersfield District would need to come up with $900,000 in savings. We have 17 classroom teachers. To come up with that, we would have to lay off half of them. How is that going to maintain the education system that we have now? And I'd like to add that right now, our school is one of the top schools in the state out of all of them. So we spend a lot of money, and what taxpayers I have explained it to, they're going to vote no. And they said, what are the results? And when I tell them the results, usually I can change their mind. Thank you.
Superintendent Hoff, can you?
I'm sorry, when you say the block grant, are you referring to the special ed block grant, sir?
John.
Are you referring to the special ed block grant or the foundation grant?
The block grant.
think you're talking about the new proposed foundation plan, the new proposal, the foundation program.
It was something south of $17,000 in the first iteration.
Yeah, I think what he's referring to is the foundation
Okay,
formula.
I just want to make sure. All right, thank you.
Okay. This young lady actually was ahead, so I want to, please.
Hi, my name is Caroline Conley. I'm a Springfield resident and a special ed teacher. I know special ed costs are a major factor in school budgets, and I read the report from last fall indicating that a lot of those high costs are mainly due to expensive outplacements for students with emotional behavioral disabilities or autism. This is for Secretary Saunders, what is the plan for improving special education and access to a continuum of services beyond just consolidating schools?
Thank you.
So I appreciate the question and want to continue to emphasize that we're not talking just about consolidation. Consolidation is a way to get to scale. So appreciate that we continue to go back to the core of this, which is focusing on the quality of education for students. We did an analysis of the current state of special education. You mentioned that report. And what we've identified in this is that we need to also focus on the quality Tier 1 instruction for all students. We do have a disproportionate number of students that are in a separate school compared to other states. And we have a large number of students that are in an inclusionary setting. What we are lacking often across the state is our districts being able to provide the in-district support because they lack the scale to provide the level of programming for students that need those additional services. We've recognized too, and looking at prior legislation that has been passed was really designed to address this very issue because we're continuing to see disparities. So Act 173 was passed back in 2018 and recognized the need for us to improve the quality of general instruction and to give access to tiered support for every student. And what we've identified is that we have had an implementation challenge and that has not been consistently implemented. So we've put together a working group of special educators across the state of Vermont as we're developing a coherent monitoring framework to ensure that there's consistency with how those best practices are implemented. We know those are the right best practices, but they have not been implemented with fidelity across Vermont. And so, often, I think in the past process, it's been, let's send out guidebooks or playbooks. And so what we're recognizing here is it's not just about providing more guidance, but making sure that we're really embedding the support. So we, as early as this spring, have launched training around making sure that we're doing the right scheduling so that students are benefiting from the opportunities to get that extra intervention. We'll be doing additional regional training as we think about this monitoring approach to ensure that we are appropriately identifying students, that those students are getting the services that they need. And in addition to that, ensuring that every district and school has access to high-quality instructional material and evidence-based curriculum. We have great variability across the state as it relates to teachers and districts having access to those resources. So all of that is part of our broader effort to ensure that there's an effective implementation of the education quality standards in the state of Vermont and ensuring that we strengthen our accountability to those best practices. So we're ramping up a lot of the monitoring that we're doing within special education, and that is coupled with support as well. So all of that is in service to improving the delivery of special education, while we also need to focus on improving general instruction, and because they're general instruction students first. And so that is part of all of the efforts that are underway now. We recently released a special education plan that outlines the specific steps that our special education division is taking to support that effort. And we're really eager to move forward and know that that support is necessary so that all students are getting the services that they need.
Thank you. Sir?
Chuck Gregory, Springfield. My question is, you've done really good work on these bills, but could you take them back to the drawing board? Now, the rationale behind this is I'm a Springfield taxpayer, and I have a child who went through the Springfield system here. I've run across internet ratings of the school systems in Vermont, and 2 of Springfield schools rated 97th and 92nd out of the top 100. I assume the other 2 schools in town are in the next 200. The fact is, affordability is something that really ought to be the second issue for the group to look at. I pay about $2,700 a year in property taxes in Springfield. Okay, I make $54,000 a year, and if anybody knows anything at all about living wage in Vermont, that is $19,000 more than I need to get by. Which means I hope everybody else in this room is enjoying the good fortune that I am. That my taxes could be raised 600% and I would still be able to get by. However, in Vermont, there is a certain number of people who are making 2,000, no, I'll make that, is it 20,000? Well, they're making 20 to 40 times what I'm making. Their tax increase on their income is only 3% more than mine is. Also, those people have an average income deduction from the state of Vermont of $250,000 each before they get assessed for their taxes. So we are looking at a different form of affordability if we have tax equity. So if you take this back to the drawing board, I would suggest starting with looking at what every child needs in order to get by in school, and then figure out how much it's going to cost to make that happen in every school, and then figure out how to adjust the taxes to make that happen without pinging too much on the people who aren't as fortunate as I am with having my $19,000 to spare. The last thing is that, okay, I always forget the last thing. But I guess you'll just have, don't forget the teachers. If you don't listen to the teachers, you're not going to find the information you need in order to make this happen. Thank you.
I'm going to have to stop because I'm going to have to clap for the teachers. Senator Harding.
Thank you, sir. That was a great question, and one of the reasons why I ultimately did not support Act 73 is because what I think we heard in 2024 was that people were upset about their taxes and that they thought their taxes were too high. And rather than focusing on tax policy, we focused on disrupting our entire education system, and I think that was a mistake. Unfortunately, we are where we are, but that being said, I'm on the Finance Committee, and we have had many conversations about how to, one, make our education finance system more equitable from a taxpayer perspective. Our current funding formula actually does an excellent job at that and was designed for that in the late 1990s. So if we're moving to a new education funding formula, how can we make sure that funding formula is adjusting for income and the ability to pay? And so there are parts of Act 73 that attempt to do that, and we still need to work on those. There's a report coming back from the tax department in a year and a half that will give us more information on things that we need to adjust in the income sensitivity part of the education funding formula. We also had conversations, and I tried very, very hard to implement a policy that would have reduced property taxes and actually shifted some of that onto what are called passive income, so investment income and things that mostly wealthy people have. That unfortunately didn't pass. I know there's been some work in the House on sort of looking at, and Rebecca could probably talk to this more, looking at sort of taxing upper income Vermonters and using it to offset the cost of healthcare and education. Tax policy is really, really hard to implement and really needs concerted effort because people care a lot about their money, obviously. So we have been working on those issues, and I think we're making some small progress. But I think it is a live conversation, and I couldn't agree with you more, and I think we need to focus on that more if we really want to make sure that our tax system is equitable and our education system is equitable. So I appreciate the sentiment, and at the same time, I'm trying to work to make sure we move forward with what is the current law without doing more harm. So, thank you.
Sir?
My neurodivergent brain took notes, so I have some questions for both the representative and the senator, and also for the secretary. On the matter of taxes, it might also be interesting to point out, because of the fact that I've served 2 years on the Budget Advisory Committee, I learned that unless you are a property owner who makes more than $126,600 a year, your homestead exemption cuts out most of your liability for the education tax. Now granted, the amount that it cuts out does decrease the closer your income gets to $126,600. But if you don't own property, if you rent, you pay nothing towards the education tax each year. So that is worthy of note. So people who are constantly voting no because they want their taxes, because they're worried about their taxes, you pay nothing in taxes for education.
Well, wait, can I just make a point on the renter piece? Because
there's been no
a big
evidence to suggest that.
Hold on.
But I just do want to note, because your point is very relevant to work that Senator Ruth Hardy did related to the renter rebate. And I don't know if that's, we don't need to answer that now, but if folks, that's just a flag on that topic.
Which also brought me to the point that the senator had made regarding the second home tax rate, which, unless I'm mistaken, sounds very much like a tax haven credit for people who may not even live here to buy a second home just so they don't have to pay taxes, which in the midst of a housing crisis in this state seems really unwise.
So, thank you for that question, because I definitely want to clarify, because it's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
That's
the way it seems. So
okay, so it would actually, and a second home tax is a shorthand for it, so I'll use that shorthand, but it includes also short-term rentals, and the intent is that actually to create a new classification of property that we could actually have a higher tax rate on. Okay. In order to lower primary residence taxes. So it's the opposite of what you heard. So thank you for asking so I could clarify that. And the renter situation actually, and I will agree with the gentleman over here that renters do end up paying their paying essentially property taxes through their rent. That is definitely, there has been analysis of that, that rents go up as property taxes go up. So over the last 6 years, as property taxes have increased significantly, so have rents. So we do have a renter credit, which as Senator White just mentioned, we worked to increase the renter credit next year, just as we're buying down people's property taxes. We're going to buy down a little teeny bit of some renters.
For property taxes, yes, but I've looked specifically for a correlation between education specifically, and I have not been able to find one. So
between education taxes and rent? Well, most of the property taxes in Vermont are education property taxes, not municipal property taxes. So there's a correlation between property taxes and rent size or levels.
The other thing is the entire premise regarding whether or not our schools are failing seems to be based off of a flawed metric. The idea that test scores are the creme de la creme of whether or not a student is succeeding or failing was not only disproven back in the 80s, it was my cousin who created the computer model that proved that it was flawed.
Awesome.
Because he proved that the tests were not testing what they thought they were testing. And they still aren't. So, unfortunately, and I've screamed this from the housetops at every public meeting, and nobody seems to want to pay any attention, which unfortunately as obnoxious as this is going to sound, just proves that our country has 60% of the population at a reading level below 6th grade. And it's sad. Test scores do not determine whether or not students are succeeding. So the entire premise from which these bills are being created is flawed. We have amazing teachers in our schools, all across the state, but in this district, I have spoken with many of them, as well as the principals. I've agreed and I've disagreed with them. We've had some humdingers of disagreements. We've also come together on issues. They are amazing educators. I have 2 children that have gone through this school system, and I have 2 children in it. I have one at UConn on a full ride on the dean's list. I have one kid at Stonehill University who's been on the dean's list every semester he's been there. I have 2 very relevant pieces of evidence that this education system works.
That is awesome. I'm really happy to hear that, and I completely agree. I have 3 kids who went through our public schools, and they are all doing very well, and I completely agree. And I completely agree that test scores are not the right metric for determining the success of our schools. But I am going to turn this over to one of the educators who has more information. So Rebecca or Peter, do you want to take this?
I was just going to say that you probably won't like the foundation plan, because the foundation plan is based on test scores, and it's an estimate of how much we have to spend on average for different students to get them to the average test score in the state.
Which creates a cookie cutter model rather than actually testing to the needs of each individual student.
I think you're right, and
which sadly brings me to the point that I needed to make to the secretary, and then I'll shut up and sit down. Unfortunately, you were speaking to concern for equity, but your track record doesn't speak to a concern for equity. And I don't see why, with that track record, we should trust your assertions to it now. You're speaking to reaching for a goal of one cookie cutter standard for the entire state for graduation, rather than wanting to actually look to the needs of each student and to the needs of each community.
I've got to stop. I understand your passion, but one of the things that I don't want to attack to the panelists, and that's kind of what you're doing. We may disagree, absolutely disagree, and I understand that. But I don't want to
pointing out inconsistencies.
No, and that's fair. But
I know it is.
I would rather not attack a panelist. We have differing opinions on many things, and so. But I understand it. And so thank you. Did you have a question for Secretary Saunders?
I asked 2 of them there.
What was the question?
It was regarding the contradiction, and also regarding the fact that one cookie cutter, standard, rather than, actually having standards that fit each student's needs, each community's needs, sets the lower income communities up to fail right out of the gate.
Thank you. Secretary Sanders, do you want to respond to that?
Absolutely. So I appreciate the passion with which you're coming to this conversation. My entire career has been focused on promoting equity and opportunities for students, and a through line of that has been really contextualizing that within the local community needs. So my background is really around community schools and understanding we need to create that continuum of support for all students, and driving improvement for schools that are serving historically marginalized students, and building an anti-racist education framework to ensure that the impacts of redlining and other issues do not inhibit a student's opportunity to access a world-class education. So that's my track record. That's what I bring to Vermont. That's what brought me to Vermont, was the ethos and the focus on education and the deep belief in fairness of opportunity for all students.
We have very well-meaning policies that have been passed, but are no longer serving us well and have resulted in tremendous inequity. We see that depending on where a child lives, depending on the wealth of their town, the size of their community, they have access to very different opportunities. And as we think about setting expectations, we need to set very high expectations. We need to show all students that we believe they can achieve at high levels. Unfortunately, the way that our system is currently organized, we have very different graduation expectations for students. And that means that we're saying to students, whether we mean to or not, that if you live in a certain community, we expect you to do less. And that's the wrong signal to be sending to students. What we're talking about is not a cookie cutter approach. We're talking about raising very clear expectations and believing that all students can achieve that, and then identifying how we can provide the right support for those students so that their learning is personalized, but they also know what those expectations are and that we're going to help them to get there. The statewide graduation requirements are intentionally designed to ensure that all students that are graduating from our schools have been able to demonstrate the learning that we know is needed for them to be successful after high school, and allows for a deepening of learning. There was a lot of intentionality in the recommendations that we put forward in terms of allowing students, setting the number of credits so that students had the time and the space to deepen their learning so they can graduate with a specialization from high school. If they're really interested in engineering, they can graduate with a seal of engineering. That's the type of vision we're going for. Or a seal of fine arts, or they've been able to master a trade. So this is how we're structuring the graduation recommendations that the state board is looking for. And it's actually designed to strengthen the intent of laws that are on the books now, but haven't been implemented effectively. We had a visit from the U.S. Department of Education back in the summer of 2024, and they told us that we have established uneven rigor in our state. We have uneven expectations for our students, and we are out of compliance with federal law. We need and we must put forward an action plan to address that. And it's not just for compliance, it's to make sure that we're building the best education system in the country, and that we're allowing for that personalization. That is part of this work. We are not assuming that everything will be cookie cutter, but we do need to establish a very clear framework with consistent expectations and allow the flexibility for communities to customize and for our teachers to also differentiate instruction so that students are really, we're meeting them where they are, but we're helping to get them to where they need to go. And that's the entire design of Act 73. It's a different way to think about engagement. So local control is an important part of this conversation. But there's more ways to be involved in your school than on the school board, which is why we put forward different policy opportunities to really strengthen engagement at that school level so that every school has a parent and a community organization that's really supporting and has a say in budgeting, right? So as part of the foundation formula, we've put forward suggestions that you do equity-based budgeting. Many of our districts do this across the state, where they actually put a portion aside and they allow for the community members to weigh in on the best way to use those dollars. Another finding we had from the U.S. Department of Education is that...
I apologize, Secretary Sanders. I don't mean it.
I would love to talk more because this is actually the core of what we're trying to do. We're trying to establish equity. We want all of our kids to have access to a great world-class education. And right now, we know that that's not happening. And this is our opportunity to come together and really structure this in a way that's going to be intentional. So thank you for the question.
I'll leave you with one last thought. Setting the end of a race at the same distance, but ignoring the fact that a third of your students are carrying a 50-pound pack is not equity, man.
There's additional funding for and support for students who have different needs. That's part of the model.
So I've got 3 questions, ma'am. So I've been, and then you, and then mine. Yes, you.
Hi, I'm Heather Harrison from
And
Weathersfield.
I apologize for this. We've got 10 minutes. So if I cut you off, I apologize. I'm trying to be respectful. But we've got You've got 10 minutes, so I want to...
I'll be quick.
Okay.
I have a couple of observations and then I have a question. What I have been hearing so far from the panel is that there is a disconnect. There is a difference between theory and practice. For instance, there is a difference between modeling and specific and providing specific examples. What I have heard from many people is that rather than modeling using data, people would like to see a specific example. Here are 3 schools who merged. This is what they found. This is where they found cost savings. This is where they found they had to pay more. I would like, and I think many people would agree with me, specific examples where this has already happened. Second of all, there is a very big difference between the goal of increasing scale and improving education, and it distresses me very much when I hear people who are educators talking about increasing scale. That's not their job. Their job is to provide education and let other people worry about the numbers. So what I'm hearing is a cart before the horse approach in Act 73. It sounds to me as though we need to have the statewide data system that I believe you, Rebecca, mentioned earlier before we could even start this process. Also, one of you mentioned that there were parts of Act 46 which were not implemented. Why not double down on getting those implemented and then see where we are? Those are my observations. Now for my question. It seems to me that the problem in education is not a problem that exists in a vacuum. We've talked about housing, we've talked about lack of housing or the affordability of housing. We've also talked about healthcare costs and other aspects that all intermesh. And so one thing that I would like to hear something about, one problem Vermont has an aging population. We want to attract young families to live in the state. I have been a teacher on the high school and college level. I'm also a youth coach. What I hear from parents is they move to Vermont because they want to have their kids in small schools. So, and we need that. We need to do that. We need to attract the young families. So what I would like to know is, how do you see Act 73 interacting with other problems that the state is encountering? Healthcare costs, housing, Asian population. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And I think that Act 73 doesn't directly interact with those things. But that's not to say that we aren't doing work on all of those things. There have been extremely detailed and concerted efforts on housing, and we're continuing to work on housing. Since the start of the pandemic, we've invested
this is when we need Senator Clarkson to be
here.
So Senator Clarkson, who does send her regrets.
Yes, she chairs the Housing Committee in the Senate, but we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in housing over the last 6 years, and we have passed several bills to make it easier to build housing in various parts of the state. We have also done rent support and mortgage support during the pandemic, and first-time home buyer assistance, and lots and lots of downtown tax credits and things like that to develop in our town centers. So we have been addressing housing in a number of ways, and I would have been more prepared to talk about housing if I thought it was going to come up. I should have. And then second, in terms of healthcare, we have done work to address some things in healthcare. Last year, in particular, we passed Act 55, which focused on prescription drug costs for high-end prescription drugs that are administered in a hospital setting. These are drugs that are often used for cancer treatment, and we found through analysis that Vermont was paying the highest price in the country for these drugs. So we implemented a price cap, and we have already seen savings in healthcare. meaning that our rates went up less than they would have. So I know that many of you are not feeling like your healthcare is cheaper, but the rate went up less than it would have. Unfortunately, the federal government is working against us in this way, taking away subsidies for healthcare, making fewer people eligible for Medicaid. So the federal government is wreaking havoc on our healthcare system right now, unfortunately, and making it hard for our work to matter. We also have implemented what's called reference-based pricing, which the Green Mountain Care Board is implementing right now, which will price hospital costs based on a percentage of Medicare prices, which will lower rates at our hospitals. So there's been a lot of work done in healthcare as well, and it's continuing. Act 73 does not address healthcare or housing. And I do want to turn the microphone over to Superintendent Burrows, because he and I did work together during Act 46, and we have a very good example of a district that merged, that increased opportunities for kids and did lower costs, but I think you should talk to that. Oh, okay, yes. So Rep. Holcomb is mentioning the second homes tax. Actually, and I agree with her that that is directly related to housing policy, and it will decrease the incentive for people to do what one of the questioners asked, which is to buy a second home in Vermont as a tax shelter. It will make people who have second homes, whether they're out-of-staters or Vermonters, if you can afford a second home, you have the means to do it, and that will hopefully lead to more housing, for primary housing for Vermonters through our taxation system, and I think that's a really important piece of Act 73. One of the things that I was most supportive of.
And I'm doing a poor job of saying what I was going to do.
Okay.
Peter, if you can just
20 seconds.
20 seconds. I think you can do it.
Okay.
And
I'll try. Just really briefly, yeah, we went through a merger process in Addison Central Supervisory Union. We became Addison Central School District. Some of the big takeaways for me, we did see some cost savings. I wouldn't say those cost savings were significant. What we did see was the allocation of resources changing to the point where students really got more than what they had previously. So we did see a school district previously that we couldn't share staff across all of these different districts. We had one position for the district that went around to all of our district schools, and we were able to share resources more and essentially be able to design instructional systems that really did improve the experience for our students. And previously, a number of those individual school districts were struggling to provide resources because they had 40 students in their school and they could only have a certain number of staff. So we were able to see pretty significant changes, both in terms of the resources that students had access to. We saw a real shift in terms of teaching and learning because we had one school board who was looking over this entire area and were really able to align practice in a way that we didn't then have all these students from different elementary schools getting very different educations coming into the middle school and high school. And it was, I think, for us, a big equity move.
Thank you, Dr. Burrows. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Sophia Lashton-Tyler from Weathersfield. So to your point, I think it would be great if you documented that, like a quickie, one sheet, here's a study example. My biggest concern, I think, having actual standards across the state is a great idea. However, I am very concerned about how we're implementing the cost savings and how much we think we're gonna save. Hold on, how much we think we're gonna save while we're consolidating and saying, oh, we need to have 2,000 kids together, and are we gonna be building new schools? I don't even wanna go there. But let me start with actually what I had wanted to say. So the district, actually, even before I do that, I compared my family's health care with the health care costs of a teacher family. So as I understand it, almost every teacher family, as a family, pays the same amount. Even though I'm pretty sure that the health care that I'm getting through my husband's insurance is much better than what teachers get, our insurance is much lower in cost, both to the company and to the employee than is Vermont's. Perhaps it would be wise to look at things outside of the box of looking at New Hampshire and Vermont looking together, or upper state New York looking together.
I apologize, we have to have a question.
All right, so the district I came from 5 years ago, where my kids grew up, is currently this year spending $21,933 per student. So I just want to be clear, spending $17,000 is not, and what we're spending is not at the top of what the country is spending. I also, I think it's important to teach our teachers what they need to teach. I think all the students need to have certain requirements. I actually hire a lot of students and young people, and I try and mentor folks. I have some kids come to me that are going to 1 or 2 classes as a sophomore.
I'm so sorry, we're up against, is there a question?
I just want to also lastly say affordability, in terms of affordability, to this gentleman's point, and to the stats that I looked up for Wethersfield, 60% of our families make less than $100,000. I don't understand, in Wethersfield, I don't understand how this is going to actually improve affordability when folks can't afford their current taxes.
Anyone? Secretary Saunders.
I was just going to say there was post-Act 46 a report that was done that explains what districts did, and there was evidence that they did find ways to be more efficient, but most of them put whatever resources were saved back into initiatives that they had cut out prior. So there were no savings, but some of them were buying more, and I think that was one of the examples that you were talking about.
Which will improve student outcomes.
Yes.
Thank you for the question. I want to go back to 2 central points that I think we largely have consensus on, which is we want to move in a direction to improve education quality while bending the cost curve, because we know affordability is an issue. And as we approach this, I would really encourage us to go back to the ideas on the table, refine them. I know there's some conversation around throwing it out, but really there's a tremendous amount of work that has been done. It has not been discredited. It is a different way to deliver education. And we've been able to show that with our significant investment in education, we'll be able to achieve the goals that have already been codified in law, and then also on top of that, achieve some of the additional goals that have been outlined. When we look at prior reform, we've tended to look at it either from governance, funding, or quality. So when you look at Act 46, it was largely related to governance without coming with any sort of financial reform. Act 60 was related to just funding without understanding governance and quality. And we've had a series of legislation that has been passed to increase educational quality, but it has become unfunded mandates. And so all of those lessons learned have formed the approach for Act 73, which is being really intentional around first starting with what are the educational quality goals, building a funding system that will support that, and operating at scale so that we can achieve equity. So when we talk about doing the modeling, it starts because the foundation formula is set. We set the foundation formula, and that's built on an understanding of what we can deliver students at scale, and the districts are a mechanism to achieve that. So I would ask that we go back, look at the budgets, look at what is possible if we're willing to change the way we deliver education to achieve these goals, to support the student opportunities that largely the goals have been, over the last couple of decades, have been unfunded mandates. And so we know what we want for our students. It's been codified in law, and it's our responsibility to ensure that the significant investment is going to our students in a way that's equitable.
So can I ask you to use your modeling and use Wethersfield as your guinea pig? Because no way can people making $100,000 or less afford a $900,000 increase in taxes?
Thank you very much. Lynn, you have the last question of the evening.
Thank you very much. I'm Lynn Bohai from Hartford, and when I was in the legislature, there was a foundation formula. Hartford paid $3 per 100 assessment. Dorset and Stowe paid 20 cents or 30 cents, somewhere between 20 and 30 cents. I'm asking the legislators to put guardrails on the foundation formula so that that does not happen again. I have two other things. One is...
Lynn, you can take as long as you want. Because it's you.
Thank you, dear. 3 years ago, the Vermont State University system merged. What happened, according to VT Digger, is the administration increased by 41%, and the classroom teaching staff went down. Pick up your pen. It's April 14th, VT Digger. Go look at it. And then I have one more. It's an audience participation question.
Oh.
Who do you want? It's a three-part question. Who do you want to make the decision about about redistricts? How to form the districts? Okay. 3 options. You can vote for more than one. Okay. Legislators, put your hand up. If you want the legislators to make the decisions about how big the districts are, put your hand up.
No, they want to hear the options first.
They want to hear all the options.
Okay. Option 2 is have the school districts decide themselves. And then the third one is do things like Springfield has done with not necessarily merging districts, but having buying districts, buying co-ops. Every school needs toilet paper, every school needs printer paper, every school needs ink. Buy it as a large, when you buy in quantity, you often get a price reduction. Okay? An example in Wilder, in Hartford, we have 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1 high school, 1 technical school, which also takes people from New Hampshire. And we have a thing called the Wilder School. It's grades 1 through 8. There's 25 students. These are kids who cannot cope in a regular classroom. The goal of the school is to, by 8th grade, get them back in a regular classroom. There are 12 school districts that send kids to the Wilder School. You can form your own. School districts are smart enough to form their own districts. Okay, you want to vote again? Yeah. Okay. Legislators should decide?
You got 1. Thanks.
The school district should decide? Or the third one is let it sort of happen organically. Let them do the buying co-ops, let them do the internal combination.
I think we have number 2.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I did a horrible job with time. We went 10 minutes over, but I appreciate it. I appreciate the passion that you have. This is an incredibly important discussion that we have to have, and we will continue this discussion. I want to thank the panelists for coming down and taking your time. We have a lot to do, and we will continue to work on this, and hopefully we will do this again at another municipality. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe.